Assalamu alaikum and hello everyone. I hope that all is well with you. I'm back to record another video about English phonetics and phonology by Peter Roach. We've reached chapter 5, which is about phonemes and symbols. Okay, I am going to start the slideshow. As an introduction in this chapter and in this video, we are going to answer the following question or to find answers to the following questions. What do we mean when we use the word sound? What is a unit of speech that can be called a sound in a language? And then how do we divide speech up into segments? Another question is how do we decide what are the sounds of English? And how do we decide how many sounds are there in English? Now, let's delve deeper into some theoretical sides of English phonology and try to find answers to the questions that you see in front of you. And as usual, I'm repeating this in every video. You can pause the video whenever you like and try to understand it in the best possible way. Sorry. So, the first part of the video is about the phoneme, what is meant by this concept, and as we said in the beginning, how do we decide about the phonemes of English? When we study speech, when we study any language, we try to divide it into very small units, which we call segments. So the word segment can more or less mean unit. A segment is synonymous with unit. Uh, while studying or when we study phonology, phonetics and phonology, we have to divide the sounds or the speech units into the smallest possible units, which we call segments. Let's, for example, divide the word man to the smallest possible units. We can say that it consists of three sounds. The sounds are m and the vowel a and n at the end of the word. What about the word mind? How do we know? Sorry, I don't know what happened, but let me go back to my PowerPoint. Mm-hmm. I hope that nothing is wrong with this. Let me continue. Good. Um, what about the word mind? We have the same consonants at the beginning and the end of the word, which are me and n. But what about the sound in the middle? I. Is I one unit, one segment, or two segments? If we replace I with a, we get a different meaning. If we replace it with if we change the word from man to mine, then from mine to man, what we change is just one unit, one segment. Therefore, we can decide that I is also one segment in English phonology. Then how can we decide on the number of the segments of English, or if we study Kurdish phonology, how can we decide that there are certain number of segments in Kurdish, Arabic, any other language? Well, in practice, the number is infinite. We cannot say that there is this exact number because we pronounce the sounds uh, differently, slightly differently from each other. My pronunciation of the Kurdish sound is different from all of your pronunciations. But the difference is so slight that the meaning of the word does not change. So you see that theoretically we can identify the number of the segments of English sounds as 44. We can say that there are no more than 44 segments of sounds in English. How did we decide on that? Why is this? Because if we replace one of them, we can change the meaning of the word completely. Let's substitute a for a as an example in the word bad. If we remove a and change it to a, what happens? From bad, the word changes into bad. So the meaning of the word changes. We get a totally different meaning. In the word man, if we change a into a, what happens? It changes to man. It's true that it's the same concept, but man is singular and men is plural. If we change n here in the word man, what happens? Man, let's change it to p. It becomes map. Man and map are different words. So because the change of the segment or the change of the sound unit changes the meaning of the word, then n and p are different from each other. When we change a here in the example of the word bad, if we change a to a, the meaning becomes uh, completely different. Then we decide that a is different from a. If we change it to, let's say, uh, the sound bud, bud. In that case, we also have a different vowel. Therefore, we decide that we have, or there are 44 segments in English. And I remind you that by segment we mean a unit, a sound. But if we pronounce the sounds slightly differently, if there are very small differences in the pronunciation, no change of meaning occurs. And in that case, we don't say that um, there are different segments. Uh, Let me remind you of the Kurdish example that I gave you. If I say nan, but you say nan in a slightly different way from mine, then in that case, my is not a different phoneme or a different segment from your in Kurdish. I may pronounce sh differently from the way that you pronounce sh. I may pronounce r differently from the way that you pronounce r. But even in that case, we don't have a different meaning. For example, I say shampoo and you say shampoo in a different way, but the difference in pronunciation is very small. Because the difference is very small, therefore we don't have a completely different meaning in that word, and therefore we cannot say that it is a different segment. But if the meaning of the word changes when we change one unit, when we change one sound, then that sound or that phoneme is different from the other sound, from the other segment, from the other unit. Now, let's compare this to the letters of the alphabet to make it clearer. Um, when we make this comparison, a letter of the alphabet corresponds or is similar to a segment of the sounds that we are studying. We all know that there are five vowel letters in the English alphabet, and the vowel letters are A, E, I, O, and U. And let's take this example. If we have like something like P at the beginning of a word and T, or because we are studying letters, let's say T and T at the beginning of a word and at the end of a word, um, and we add the different vowel letters of English between these two letters, what do we have? We get pat, pet, pit, pot, and put. And each word is completely different from the following word, although we have just changed one letter. The letter between the two consonant sounds here with the consonant letters is A, but in the second word is E. And by changing one letter, we have changed the meaning of the word. Therefore, we decide that A is different from E, and is different from I, and I is different from O, and so on. We can do the same thing with sounds. You see, if we have the plosive sound p at the beginning of a word and the plosive sound t at the end of a word, and we add the six short vowels of English between them, what do we get? We get six different words: pit, pet, pat, pot. The spelling of pot is P-U-T-T, pot, and put. You see, by changing one sound, we get a different word with a different meaning. Therefore, we decide that E is different from E, and E is different from A is different from A is different from O, and O is different from U. All of them, each one of them, is an independent segment or an independent sound unit. Let's continue with the comparison of the alphabet letters to the sound system of English. If we take the letter A, we said that if we pronounce uh, a sound slightly differently, we don't change the meaning, and because the meaning doesn't change, we can't say that the sound is independent and different from the other sounds. Now, when we use the example of the alphabet letters, we can make this meaning or this concept even clearer. If we look at these letters, A, a capital letter a small letter A, another small letter A, and U. Three of them represent the same letter, which is the letter A. But the fourth one represents a completely different letter. Two of them can be used interchangeably, which means in the place of each other. What are the two letters that, or the two representations that can be used in the same place? I want you to pause the video and think about it, and then after playing the video, I will tell you the answer. The answer is that the two in the middle can be used in the same place interchangeably. They are slightly different representations of the same letter. But the first one here, the first one is more common in printed writing. The second one is more common in handwriting. Although I told you to pause the video, but I forgot that I have given you both letters here at the end of the sentence, but never mind. The first one, as I said, is more common in printed writing. The second one is more common in handwriting, but both of them can be found, for example, in the middle of a sentence, and the meaning doesn't change, and it is okay. It's totally fine in English to use both of them in the middle of a sentence. But if we take the example of the first two representations, a capital letter A and a small letter a, or sometimes it's called an uppercase A and a lowercase a, we always find the capital A at the beginning of sentences and at the beginning of proper nouns like Ahmed. But we always find the small letter A in the middle of sentences. They're never used in the same place. A context in which one of them could occur, the other could not ever occur. Um, there are similar situations in speech sounds. So why did we talk about this example? To show that when we have slightly different pronunciations of the same sounds, it is similar to slightly different writings or representations of the same letter. But the example of the capital letter A and the small letter A can be used when we talk about allophones. In some situations, a dark L, for example, is possible, but a light L is not possible. In another situation, in another place of a word, when we pronounce a word, a light L is possible, but the dark L is not possible. For example, in the BBC, at the beginning of a word, the dark L is not possible in the British accent. Usually, they don't say like, they say like. Therefore, dark L is not possible in initial position. It's the same as not using a small letter in or at the beginning of a word. When we talk about phonemes and representations or um, realizations of that phoneme, or when we talk about the alphabet and representations of the letters in writing on paper, we talk about abstract and real concepts. By abstract, we mean the alphabet that you can't see or touch. So let's say letter A. What is letter A? Can you touch the letter A? Can you touch the letter B? Can you see the letter B if it's not written down in a representation? No, it is an idea that we have in our minds. We know that there are letters in every language. But when it is made real, when it is written as marks on a paper, then it becomes real. It is represented in writing. Again, we have the same case with speech. We have an idea in our brains about the sound a, the sound b, the sound t, the sound p, and so on. And we have a realization of that sound when we pronounce it. You know that sounds are pronounced, but the example, the comparison that we take uh, is, or that we make, is with letters. So there is an abstract set of units, a group of units that we use as the basis of our speech. And those are the 44 sounds that exist in English, if you speak English. The exact number, I don't exactly know the number of Kurdish phonemes, but if, let's say, there are 40 sounds, let's say there are 40 sounds in Kurdish, so it is that exact number which we call the set of units that we use as a basis in order to speak Kurdish. In phonology, these units are called phonemes. So each unit, each sound is called phoneme. And a phoneme is an abstract idea that we cannot see, that we cannot touch, that we cannot hear. It's in our minds. But when we pronounce it, it becomes real. Therefore, the pronunciation, again, I remind you, can be different from one person to another person. Sorry. The complete set, in English, the 44 phonemes are called the phonemic system of English. It is the system, a complete system together that can be used as the basis of speech. Now, um, let's talk more about allophones and the different realizations, the different ways that each sound or the majority of sounds are pronounced. In English, there's at least two possible ways of pronouncing b. I remind you that we said the plosive b is not fully voiced. It is sometimes very uh, rarely voiced, and sometimes it's not voiced at all. So these two possible ways can be heard in speaking English. Some people may focus on b, may emphasize on pronouncing b, and in that case, the b is voiced. But in rapid speech, when they use uh, language normally, they don't emphasize on any specific sound, and in that case, b is not fully voiced. These two different ways of pronouncing b is called two different, or are called two different realizations of the phoneme. When the abstract sound is made real, a realization means to make something real, to give it a physical appearance. And in that case, sound is also a physical phenomenon. So it is made real in the form of sound. It is a realization. بكردي برجستبون خۆی لە مێشکمانە ئێمە واماندانەوە لە زمانی ئینگلیزیە چل و چوار دەنگ هەیە ئەو دەنگەی کە لە مێشکمانە هەیە شتێکی خەیاڵی بێگەردی با بڵێن یعنی بێ کێشە و بێکەم و کورتیە بەڵام کاتێک دەرئەبڕدرێ کاتێک بەرجەستە ئەکرێ ڕێڵایزیشن وتمانچی بەرجەستە بوون یا بەرجەستەکردن لە کاتی بەرجەستەکردنیدا ئەگۆڕێ دەربڕینی ب لای من لەوە شێت بە جیاوازێکی زۆر زۆر کەم جیاواز بێ لە دەربڕینی ب لای تۆ و لای ئەوی تر و بە هەمان شێوە بۆیە بە ئەگە باسی ئەو دەربڕینانە بکەین باس لە جیاوازێ زۆر بچووکەکان ناکەین بەڵام ئەو جیاوازانەی کە بەرچاون بۆ نمونە دەربڕینی ب بە لەرە و دەربڕینی ب بە بێلەرە voiced and voiceless. These are called, as I said, two different realizations of that phoneme. Sorry again. One can be substituted for the other without a change in meaning. The voiced and voiceless b can be used in the same place, and whether it is voiced or voiceless, the meaning of the word doesn't change. It is still a realization of the same phoneme. It doesn't become a different phoneme. While bear in mind that in some languages, the changes that don't, the realizations that don't change the meaning in English may change the meaning in a different language. But here, because they don't change the meaning, then they are realizations of the same phoneme. If we go back to the example of the alphabet, where either A, capital letter A, or small letter A can occur, we can see the difference in these examples. You see, Ahmad starts with a capital letter A, and in the middle we have a small letter A. This sentence, a cat is an animal, the first letter should start with a capital letter, but we have 1, 2, 3, 4 other A's which are in the small or in the lowercase form. So this is the correct way of writing these letters. But you know that in English, it is not possible, it is not correct to write the word Ahmed like this, to start with a small letter and in the middle to have a capital letter. It's not possible to start a sentence with a small letter and have capital letters in the middle of the sentence. So, where A capital letter can occur, a small letter cannot occur. We also find, as I said in other slides, similar cases in speech. And the example that I gave you was about darkly versus lightly, or aspirated versus unaspirated plosives. In English, at the beginning of words, p, t, and k are aspirated. Pat, pork, tea, all of them are aspirated. But at the end of words, p, t, k are unaspirated. They are not aspirated when they're pronounced in correct English pronunciation. It may be pronounced incorrectly by non-native speakers, by foreign speakers of English, but we depend on the way that English speakers pronounce those sounds. So p is aspirated at the beginning of words and unaspirated at the end of words. Therefore, at the beginning of a word, we cannot have an unaspirated p. And at the end of a word, we cannot have a p that is aspirated. Again, the dark L, which is represented with this symbol, will never be found in the place where light L is appropriate, and vice versa. It's not appropriate to use dark L at the beginning of a word in the British accent, and it is not appropriate to use a light L after a vowel in the British accent. Usually, English people don't say all. All is not British English or American English for that matter. They say all with dark L after a vowel. But even if you say all, the meaning is understood and we don't have a different phoneme. Both of both dark L and light L are different realizations of the same phoneme, just as a capital A and a small a are different realizations of the same letter, although they cannot be used in the same place. So you see how we decide on the number of phonemes. If the meaning changes, they are different phonemes. If the meaning doesn't change, although they cannot be used in the same place, if the meaning doesn't change, then they are not different phonemes. They are realizations of the same phoneme. If you compare this idea to the idea of allomorph, different realizations of the same morpheme. I hope that you've studied this in morphology. You know that the ed morpheme, which is a past tense marker, can be realized in three different ways after different pronunciations or after different sounds at the end of the verb stem. If the verb stem ends with t or d, it is the ed is realized as it. For example, hunted, branded. It is ed, but it's pronounced as it. So it's one of the allomorphs of, or one of the realizations of ed. یەکێک لە بەرجەستە بوونەکانی ed لە شێوازی چیە id. یەکێکی تر لە بەرجەستە بوونەکانی another realization is in the form of t when it follows the voiceless phonemes like sh, p, f, k, except for t. Fished, slipped, kicked, and so on. And the third allomorph, the third realization of ed is in the form of d when it follows the voiced phonemes except for d. Buzzed, slammed, banned, and so on. So I hope this helps to understand the idea of different realizations, different representations of the same unit. This example is taken from morphology, so different realizations of the same morpheme, but we study phonology in our module. We talk about different realizations of the same phoneme or the same sound. The same sound of l, the phoneme of l, can be realized as dark l, like in all, a light l, as in blood, or a devoiced l, which is a different realization or a different allophone. So when we have a case like this, we say that the realizations are in complementary distribution. In which case, in a case where the dark L will never be found in the same place of light L. When two phonemes cannot be used in the same place, we say that the realizations or the allophones are in complementary distribution. They complement each other, but they are not used in the same place. But when they occur in the same place without any change of meaning, they are in free variation. They are in free variation. The example of voiced and devoiced b. We say that sometimes b can be voiced and often it is not voiced, or there's very little voicing. And I have said allophones many times, and I remind you that we call the different realizations allophones, that realizations of the same phoneme. Again, the dark L is an allophone, the light L is another allophone. An allophone of what? They're allophones of the phoneme L, the abstract sound, the pure sound that we have in our minds. Now we'll move on to another unit, another section, in the same chapter. Now we know that how we can decide on the number of the phonemes in a language, and we know how to differentiate between a phoneme and an allophone. We'll move on to talk about symbols and to talk about transcription. In any language, there are phonemic symbols and phonetic symbols. We mainly focus on phonemic symbols because each phoneme or the number of phonemic symbols must be exactly the same as the number of phonemes in an individual language. Therefore, in English, we said that we have 44 symbols, as 44 phonemes. There should be 44 symbols in the phonemic system of that language, or for the phonemic system of that language. Some symbols consist of two characters. Therefore, we regard ch, t, tish as one symbol which represents the sound that's found at the beginning of the word ch. Ch. It has two characters. The first character is t and the second character is sh, but we regard it as one symbol. J is also a similar case, which consists of two characters, but it is one symbol that represents one phoneme. When uh, we teach pronunciation, traditionally, phonemic transcription is taught to students. Usually, they are required to learn how to transcribe the sounds of the language that they study. Every speech sound, therefore, should be identified as one of the phonemes and written with the appropriate symbol. There should be a symbol for the sound p, another symbol for the sound p, and all the other consonants, and all the vowels that exist in that language. Phonemic symbol has its advantages and disadvantages. One of the advantages is that it is easy to learn, it is not complex, there are not a large number of symbols, but one of its disadvantages is that it is not completely accurate. There are many aspects and much information that is lost when phonemic transcription is made. The best known set of symbols that exist in order to use in transcription is that of the IPA's alphabet. The IPA stands for the International Phonetic Association, and sometimes it stands for the International Phonetic Alphabet. Sometimes, as I said, transcription needs to be much more accurate and it contains much more information. If a transcription is like that, it is called phonetic transcription, not phonemic transcription. In phonemic transcription, each symbol is used for a sound, but in phonetic transcription, darkly and lightly, for example, are identified. Voiced and devoiced sounds are identified. Sometimes the sound is called dentalized. That is also identified, and there's a lot of detail in phonetic transcription. But fortunately for you, we are not going to focus on phonetic transcription, and what you are required to learn is phonemic transcription. And by the way, in exams and in daily homeworks, you will be required to do phonemic transcription. In phonetic transcription, there are a lot of diacritics, which are small symbols that are used above, in the middle, or below the phonemes. For example, a small raised H represents aspiration. Therefore, a P with followed with a small raised H means that that P is aspirated. But without the H, without the small h, the P is unaspirated. You see that phonetic transcription is used between brackets, but the phonemic transcription is used between slanted brackets. Another example is that of a light li, dark li, and a devoiced li. A devoiced li comes after play or after play, versus the phonemic transcription, which is li, the phoneme, the sound that we have in our brains between slant brackets. Therefore, if we see these brackets, these square brackets, we should know that this is phonetic transcription. But if we see these slant brackets, we need to realize that this is phonemic transcription, not phonetic transcription. Uh, in chapters 2 to 4, we mainly focused with matters of phonetics, how to describe sounds, how they're pronounced, and so on. But um, from now on, after or from chapter 8 on, actually, we will also deal more in depth with phonology. When we talk about how the phonemes function in a language, how what's the relationship between them or among the different phonemes, the abstract side, the theoretical side of the phonemes, what's a weak syllable, what's a strong syllable in English, what is possible at the beginning of a syllable in English and what is not possible at the beginning of a syllable in English. In that case, we're talking about phonology. We don't describe the sounds, how they're pronounced, what's their place of articulation, what's their manner of articulation, what's the voicing of that sound. Therefore, the phonemic system is uh, very similar to a set of chess pieces. You know the game of chess؟ بكردي بيوتري الشطرنج بكردي عربي بوشي أي شبهين بالشطرنج. We said that we talk about the functions of the phonemes. What's their role? What do they need to do, or how do they function, and what's their relationship to the other phonemes in that system, in that language? When we talk about a system, we mean the language. The exact shape and color is not important in a set of chess pieces, as long as they can be differentiated from each other. I will provide you with a picture in order to explain this point. But the number of the pieces is very important. There should be 16 pieces in a game of chess. And the moves is also very important. Uh, uh, for example, a knight moves in certain ways. The queen also moves in certain ways as well. Yeah, and also the relationship to all the other pieces are very important. If you hear a voice, that's Raboon's voice, which is one of my naughty sons. He's calling me to watch football with him. Yes. Let's explain this with pictures. You see, I have different sets and different shapes, different colors of chess pieces, but in each picture, the knight, ويبقى كوديبيو دي أسب, is still a knight. You see, here is a knight. Here is a knight with a different shape and color. Here is a knight with a different color. Somehow, another knight, but still it is a knight. So let's go back to sounds. P is still P if it is pronounced by me, by you, or by another speaker, any speaker. It is still the same phoneme as long as it's pronounced correctly, although there might be slight changes. But what is important, so the shape is not important, but what's important is that it should be used in the place that that is usually used in that language, in which it is usually used in that language, and um, the moves that it makes. You see, these are different moves. This is more important than the shape and the color of the pieces. And going back to phonology, it is the position in which that sound should be used is more important than the way it is articulated. But I remind you, we're talking about differences between native speakers, not differences between a native speaker and a non-native speaker who doesn't know how to pronounce that sound. Let's take an example from a Kurdish speaker. We have difficulty with pronouncing th, the th, the voiceless th sound. So it should be pronounced as th in the word mouth. But if you pronounce it as s, mouse, you have a different meaning, a different word, and in that case, it's not acceptable. We cannot say that it's okay to pronounce it differently. We have different speakers. No, because in English it gives you a different meaning. Therefore, it is not okay to use the sound with that uh, difference. Every language has its own limitations on phoneme sequences. This is also an area of phonology. This is not a description of the sounds and their articulation. It is a description of the restrictions and the limitations that it has on how to use the sounds at the beginning and at the end of words. For example, no English word starts with this sequence. There is no English word, and there has never been in the history of English a word which starts with zibf. For example, zibfan. No, there is not such a word in English. And no English word ends with but this one is possible in other languages. Think of gunah. Yeah, it ends with and h at the end of the word. In Arabic, ilah is possible, but in English, this is not possible. So this is one of the restrictions on phoneme sequences. A sequence is a series, a number of things following each other. Therefore, phonology tries to analyze what are the limitations in a language. And it is usually helpful to do this by studying the syllables of that language that you study. Syllable watabarka wakazana. And another point that I want to focus on is so far we have been talking about segmental phonology because we have been talking about one segment, another segment, individual segments, individual units. But sometimes the contrasts, the differences in meaning, are not a result of difference between one segment and another segment, one phoneme and another phoneme. It is sometimes the result of differences go beyond more than one phoneme. Therefore, it is called suprasegmental phonology, more than one segment. Stress is one of the important aspects of suprasegmental phonology. Why is it important? Let's take these two examples. Import and import. Import, import. If the stress is on the first syllable, on im, then we uh, hear it, we understand it as a noun. But if the stress is on the second syllable, on port, import, import, in that case we understand it as a verb. You see, the category of the word changes, the word class changes, or the part of speech, as we call it in grammar. Intonation is also very important in suprasegmental phonology because it goes over several units, several segments, or let's say in phonology language, in phonology terminology, several phonemes. Right consists of how many segments or how many phonemes? R, I, and T. Three phonemes. If we pronounce right with a rising pitch or a rising intonation, we understand it as um, something like a question, right? So I want to know your answer. What do you think? But if we pronounce it with a falling pitch or a falling intonation, it can be heard as confirmation or agreement. Right. Yes, I agree with you. That's right. That's correct. But in the first case, it is heard as something like a question or invitation to a speaker to continue. Go on. What do you mean? Right? I want you to continue. I want you to go on. So this is a contrast, a sound contrast that goes extends over several segments. Therefore, it is called suprasegmental phonology. And with this, we come to the end of this video. I want to thank you for bearing with me and watching this piece of video until the end. Thanks again.